Hello and welcome to another Foreman community demo. Please note that this demo is being recorded, so if you have any problems with the live stream, you can watch back at a later stage. During the demo, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on freenode.irc at the Foreman and on the YouTube live chat as well, as both will be monitored, and we'd love to have your questions. Before we begin, just a few short announcements. So first up, as part of an ongoing effort to improve the host details page, there's a survey around how you use substatuses. By completing the survey, you're helping shape the future of the host details page and help making it as relevant to your system as possible. There's a link to this survey in the YouTube description for this video and also in the live chat, so please check it out. So just on the release side of things, with regards to the upcoming release of Foreman 2.4, last week there was a second release candidate of 2.4 available. Please test the release candidate to help make the 2.4 as stable a release as possible. And after a meeting yesterday, it was announced that there will be a third release candidate of 2.4, and that should become available around March 9th. For more information, you can check out the release team's meeting notes on our Foreman community discourse. And as you know, there's quite an important upcoming release of Katello 4.0. The second release candidate has been available for a few days now, and there's a lot of important and kind of large changes impending. So I'm going to hand over this to jsherril, who's going to give a better, more in-depth summary of where you need to watch out, what you need to look for, and just everything that you need to know for now. So thank you, Justin.
All right. Yes, as Melanie said, RC2 of Katello 4.0 just came out, which actually was the first released RC. The main things I wanted to talk about were, or bring up the fact that Pulp 2 is going away, as most of you probably know. With 4.0, it is gone. So new installs on 4.0 will not contain Pulp 2. The important thing to know is that you need to run through a Pulp 3 migration before upgrading to 4.0. This process can take a while, and we've had some bug reports coming in that we're working on fixing. The upcoming 3.18.2 release will have a whole ton of bug fixes, as well as workflow enhancements, one of which I'll be showing off in a few moments. And as we get more issues coming in around the migration, we will continue to fix those. The 3.18 release will be somewhat of a longer-lived release as we continue to work on those and fix those. The Pulp team is also pushing new releases for the migration plugin for Pulp 3 that contain fixes. Some of those have already been released, even outside of the 3.18 release schedule. So make sure you go through this, get comfortable with this process. If you run into issues, please file a community discourse post. And we've tried to do a good job of triaging those and addressing all of the comments. A lot of times the comments are, we've opened a bug on this, we're working on a fix. It'll be available in the next Z stream. So definitely try to have some patience with us as we work through any issues. The other big thing I wanted to mention is we're working on moving our documentation from theforeman.org over to docs.theforeman.org. And this will feature enhanced documentation, more updated documentation. It also, we're also working on some new quick start guides, which help introduce new users to Katello, sort of feature by feature. so that it's a little bit more clear the simplicity of using Katello when you're getting started, and not try to introduce more advanced features that aren't needed when you're starting out. So if you see any issues with this, feel free to open issues on the GitHub. The GitHub for it is Foreman documentation. And you can open just GitHub issues there. I think that covers everything.
Thanks, Justin. I just got pinged there by Chris, and he told me that the live stream, that there's a bit of, it's buffering a bit at the moment. There's probably some network issues. So I'm just going to, just before we begin the demos, I'm just going to drop in a link to the Google Meet to anyone who wants to join, rather than stream if it's becoming an issue and it's bothering you. I can see that there's a slight delay even in me speaking. So just 1 second, I'm going to drop in that link, and then anyone who wants to join can join. Okay, doke. So that is done. So we can continue now. Let me see. I've dropped it into both the YouTube chat and also to Freenode. So if anyone wants to join, they are welcome. And our next speaker is Evgeny, who is going to let us know about all what's new in the Foreman Ansible modules 2.0. Well,
hey, let's see. Not this one. Okay, you should be seeing my screen, and if not, that's not too bad because there are only a very few minor nodes over there, and I'll be talking through all of them. So what's new in Foreman 2.0, Foreman Ansible modules 2.0? Well, actually, it's already 2.0.1 because as usually, once you release something, the very next day you will find a bug and you will follow up with a small bug fix release. Nevertheless, let's see what's really new here. As usual, new releases means new modules for us because I don't know, we probably want to have like a module for everything in Foreman, and we are still far away from it. One thing that you will find really new in the modules is info modules. We have currently two of them, host info and repository info. They allow you to fetch information like a read-only action against hosts and repositories. This was part of a larger planning to get info modules for other entities too. Those two were just the first one to implement and try out how we can implement it nicely. If you use them, or also if you use the resource info module, which is the old module that can query all resources, but in a rather unpleasant for the user way, please have a look at the new ones and comment in issue 1.1.2.1 whether you find the current way nice for your use case or if you need any more features. And the third module that we added in this release was Puppet classes import, which allows you to import Puppet classes from a proxy. And we also plan to have the same for Ansible, where you can import Ansible variables and Ansible roles. And if anybody wants, and I don't even know if it's needed, like for Salt or any other config management provider we have, we'll be happy to provide the same if you tell us where and how. New modules is not the only thing that you will get in this release. You also will get new roles. We are currently focusing on providing roles that are that aim to help you with providing content. So we are trying not to touch provisioning and stuff like this right now. So it will be coming in the future. Right now, it's mostly around content. The idea is that at some point you will have a defined data structure somewhere and say, look, I want rel 7, rel 8, and CentOS 8 on my katello. And there will be roles that will do the syncing for you, the activation keys, a lifecycle environments, everything. So today we already have roles for activation keys, environments, repositories, and sync plans. And there are more in the works, like content views and stuff like this. So try it out as usual, and please report back if that meets your needs and whether you need something else. Obviously, new modules and new roles usually don't bump the major version of a release. A major version bump is usually a breaking change, and we have one, even though it's not really breaking anything, but we were contacted by users and also followed up on Ansible best practices that are published and realized that our roles would use variables that would clash with other roles, like from another collection or user written roles. So we now switched to have all variables prefixed with Foreman. So if before you would say username, now it's Foreman _username, which makes sense, but obviously requires you to change all your playbooks. And that's the only thing that is the reason for the major bump here. I guess editing your variables should be not too much of a work, and then you can go on and use 2.0 instead of the 1.5 release that we had previously. Besides bigger changes, we also have some minor things and bug fixes in this release. I have noted 4 of them that I found, while minor, still quite notable. Number 1 is, and that was the reason for the 2.01 release, when we configure host interfaces, that was a feature that we introduced in 1.5. We accidentally filtered too much data out, and if you would try to set any option to false, like build or managed for an interface, instead of setting the option to false, it would just not transfer the data to the API. And this produced quite some errors in a user environment, so we fixed that now. Another thing that we changed is that you can now, when you deploy machines on VMware or overt, you can now specify clusters and networks by name and not by the ID. So you don't have to look up the ID in VMware, which was quite cumbersome. And the limit to VMware and overt is only because those are the two that actually require this translation. Other compute resources don't need it and just have names and IDs, the same thing. And if you're wondering, yes, we are planning to have support for storage translation from the storage, like data store and storage domain. This is also planned for the future. There is a PR open if you want to try it out. And another two two bugs we fixed was number one was the Kickstart repository. If you ever want to define one for your host, and your host is inside the lifecycle environment or has a content view assigned, it would accidentally, before the fix, it would assign the Kickstart that is available globally, which might or might not work depending on where in your network your machine is. And now if you provide those, it will look it up correctly for you. And the last fix that we shipped was the subnet and domain assignment was broken in when you would configure multiple interfaces on one host. Like one interface would be fine, but multiple was broken. And yeah, that's it. That the fixes and changes that I found notable. Obviously, there are few more in the full changelog that you can find on GitHub and also on our documentation page. And yeah, I'll see you here again when we have more bugs and more features for you to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. Has anyone any questions for Evgeny? Tomer has just told me that the stream has stabilized, so I'd say we will catch up soon. But anyone who has joined us here on the Google session, or have you any questions for Evgeny on what he shared? So I would just like to remind people, if they do have questions for Evgeny, they can ask at any point during this demo, and I will make sure he gets it and get an answer for you as well. So the stream looks like we are catching up also. So up next is Justin once again, and he's now going to tell us about Pulp 3 migration of corrupted missing content workflow.
All right. My screening sheet. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Coming up now, yep.
Oh, yeah, going a little slow this morning. All right. So currently in the with the Pulp 3 migration on Katello 3.18, if you run the migration and there's a single RPM that is missing, or a single RPM that is corrupted, or file or anything, the migration will fail. And the Pulp team added support for ignoring these files, but providing more feedback to the user, giving them more choice, more visibility into this seemed like an important thing to do. And so we've added support for ignoring during the migration, and I'll walk you through that process. So when 3.18.2 comes out, so this isn't out today, but we'll be out with 3.18.2, which is, I believe, currently being worked on to be released. When you run the content prepare Foreman maintain command, and you have corrupted content, you'll see this error. Some corrupted or missing content found. Run Foreman maintain content migration stats for more information. So we'll go ahead and run that. And that will just take a second. So what this is doing is it's looking to see what all has been migrated, what was not migrated properly due to being corrupt or missing. And if it detects anything that was corrupted or missing, we get this giant warning. And so we can see that there are 3 RPMs that are corrupt or missing. And it actually dumps out a list into this directory. In this case, we just have RPMs, so that's all that's listed there. And you can see the list of these 3 RPMs. It also gives us 4 options for us to proceed. We could go to our repositories under products and do a verified checksum sync. That will work if the RPMs were synced from a repo and are still available in the upstream repo. that will correct the problem. However, that may not be the case. It could have been an RPM that you uploaded years and years ago. It could have been something that was synced years and years ago. It's no longer available. Which, in a lot of cases, due to bit rot or maybe due to some action that was taken on the server years ago, these packages could be corrupted or missing, and you may not notice. So in a lot of cases, you may not care. Right? If it's not causing you a problem, if it's something from years ago, it's a really old version, it may not. You may just want to keep going with the migration. So the second option here is we could delete the repositories. In a lot of cases, that may be difficult or not desirable. For example, if you had a CentOS, you may want the newer packages, but you may not care about the older packages. We could manually fix them on the file system, so we could find where these packages are in var-lib-pulp and put them in place. That's only applicable if it's, if there's these 3 packages, we could probably do that. But in a lot of cases, that's not going to be feasible. So then the last option is to skip them. So I could look and I could say, oh, these are all old packages. If there were 10,000 packages listed here, that might be a bigger problem that I might want to open up a community support post about. But in this case, it's just a few. I know that I don't care about these. I just want to continue with the migration. So here it's suggesting we run another task, which will basically approve that I know that these are missing or corrupted. I want to keep going. So you see here, it says it will be ignored. If for some reason I decide that I've made a mistake and I want to undo that, I can run this command and it will mark anything that was corrupted to be skipped to be no longer skipped. So now I'm going to rerun the migration command. And this should not error this time because even though there is the corrupted content, it will ignore those. And after the migration and after the switch over to Pulp 3, those RPMs just will not be present within Katello or Pulp. So you see now it's been done. The migration is successful. So now I can continue with the process of doing the switch over to Pulp 3. And that's it.
Thanks, Justin. So we'll just pause for a moment to see if there are any questions for Justin or about anything else so far. Okie doke. I can see there's I can see from my display that you're still demoing on the live stream, so we're a little bit behind, but we will continue. And if anyone has questions, just feel free to drop them in, and we'll get to them. So up next, we have Leos, and he's going to show us some registration tab improvements.
Yes, let me share the screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you see the host detail?
Yep.
Cool. So I'm going to talk about new tab on host detail. Well, actually, it's not a new tab. The name the tab, as you can see now, is called initial configuration, but originally it was called registration tab. The reason why we renamed it was that there's a new host registration feature and users got confused with the function. Basically, what this tab is doing, that with this command, you can render content of the Linux registration template, where there are steps like deploying SSH key, install it insights, or basically more stuff about initial configuration, then the registration. So we renamed the name of the tab. Also, what we add was that originally this tab was available only for managed hosts, but now it's available also for unmanaged hosts. And there's a link to the template that is going to be used when you run this command on the machine. For this host, this Ubuntu, we will run Linux registration default. And as you can see, there are steps like remote execution SSH deploying and installing insights and stuff like that. The name of the template is still Linux registration. That is going to be changed in follow-up pull requests, but that change is a little bit bigger as we need to migrate the original kind from registration to the host initial configuration. But I believe that next demo, I will have presentation about it. And yeah, that's basically all the changes that happened with this step. That's all from me.
Thank you, Leos. Let me see. So any questions for Leos? I think I would probably say to anyone who's still watching live on the YouTube that just look in the chat and join us on the actual meet, because I think that I'm getting reports of just quite long delays and freezes, so it's just not worth your while. So let me see. If there are no questions, we can move on to Ian, who's going to speak about container gateway updates, CA cert configuration, and SQLite.
All right, thanks, Melanie. Just gonna share my screen. All right, great. So, hey everyone. I've got another update here for the container gateway. So just a quick refresher, if you haven't heard of the container gateway before, it is a smart proxy plugin that allows you to consume container images from Pulp 3 through your smart proxy. So with Pulp 2 going away, we're losing the features they had there to have a container registry. So now we need this plugin to have everything be configured properly so you could actually consume the container content from Pulp 3. And so pretty much I'm going to go through a few new features that we've added since I've last shared about the container gateway. But essentially, so for 4.0, since we will be having to deal with Pulp 3 now, we're going to be releasing this for people who need to use container content. Right now, at the beginning, we'll only be supporting pulling from unauthenticated. We're going to only support pulling container images that exist in lifecycle environments that have the unauthenticated pull checkbox ticked, because we don't have all of the authentication stuff set up quite yet, but that will be coming soon. But anyway, so let's get into this. So firstly, the most important bit is that we have Foreman installer support set up for the container gateway. So I just tested this recently with a proxy development environment, but if you bring up a proxy that has this mcorr container plugin enabled, it'll automatically bring in the container gateway. You can just see this just a little tidbit of code from the installer. You can see the Foreman proxy content container class there. So that ensures that you'll get this. And it's great because of this next point. So we have new certificate configuration. Before, you just had to configure the cert and the key, but now we allow you to configure the CA cert. But what's even better now is that we use the Foreman certs by default. So really, just right out of the box, you can use the default configuration we have, and it should all just work, depending in a more normal environment. So if you enable it with the installer, which it should be enabled by default, if it isn't now, at some point at least, it should just work out of the box. And then, yeah, so here's just the configurable option in an example container gateway config option. You don't have to set these if you don't want. They have defaults. Anyway, my last update here is that the little database we have to keep track of authentication related data, we're now using SQLite instead of Postgres. Originally, we started using Postgres because mcorr, the database, already had Postgres there, but it was a bit complicated setting up a new Postgres database. We decided with the installer, more complicated than it needed to be. And since the smart proxy is going to continue being single-threaded for the foreseeable future, we don't need the multi-threaded guarantee there that Postgres gives. So we're using nice, easy, and light SQLite. And let's see, yeah, that is all the updates I have for the container gateway. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ian. And if there's anyone on who has joined us who would like to come off mute and ask questions, you're free to do so also. And let me see. So far, I don't see any questions and comments. Allegedly, our live stream is doing better than it was right now. So I think we can move on. Ian, thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'll get them to you. So up next is Jeremy, who is going to talk about the showing the katello-agent status in hammer ping.
Thank you, Melanie. Okay, I'll share my screen here. So I want to talk to you just for a couple of minutes about an update to hammer ping. And this actually relates to the katello-agent and Pulp. As you know, as has been mentioned previously in this demo, Pulp 2 is going away in Katello 4.0. And this actually affects katello-agent, which is the package that we install on host to facilitate things like remote package install and removal. So you may remember all this from Jonathan's previous demo that he did a few weeks ago. But bottom line is, previously katello-agent was actually talking to Pulp 2 to accomplish all of its tasks. And now it's talking to Katello itself. And as a nice side bonus of that, we have been able to add a new section to the hammer ping tool. And it's now going to tell you the status of katello-agent. Sorry, I got a little carried away with this graphic here, but here's our shiny new hammer ping section. It now tells you how katello-agent's doing, how many processed, how many failed, and then the overall status. So by the way, if this ever has an overall status of fail, I think restarting the services should hopefully fix it. The Foreman maintain service restart. I saw the other day someone was trying to do a rerun a Foreman installer because katello-agent was failing, and that really shouldn't be necessary. So that's all I've got for my first demo. Any questions?
None that I can see, Jeremy, so far. Yep. No, so no questions, Jeremy. Your second demo is with is a developer demo, if I'm right.
Yes.
So we'll just do one more on the Foreman user ones before we move on to the developer demos. Thank you very much, Jeremy. If there are any questions, I'll get them to you. So our final Foreman user focus demo of today is about Ansible, and it is importing roles and variable improvements, and it is Shira who is up. So in your own time, Shira. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Let me share my screen. Okay, hi everyone. I would like to show 2 improvements when importing roles and variables. So in the past, if you wanted to import roles and their variables, you needed to perform 2 steps. First, you needed to import roles from the roles page, and then you would go to the variables page and import the variables. Now it is possible to import the roles and their variables in one step from the roles page. So let's see how it looks like. So now I'm the Ansible roles index page, and I just will press on the import from the smart proxy. And now I have this table, and maybe I will go over these columns, but because some of them are new. So the name is the name of the roles, and the operation, it could be one of those 3 options. I can have an import role, which means that I have a new role that I would like to import completely with all of these variables. So in the variables column, I can see that I have 10 variables that I would like to import. I have also the remove role operation, which means that in Foreman, I have a role that was imported in the past, probably from the smart proxy, and it was removed from the smart proxy. So now I would like to it to be synced with the smart proxy, and also to remove the role and its variables from Foreman. And last operation that I have on the role is the update role variables, which refers to roles that were imported in the past from the smart proxy and were changed. And changed could be several options. In the variable columns, I can see the possible changes that we can have for these variables. For example, I have add, which means basically new variables to add. I have remove, which means existing variables in Foreman that were deleted from the smart proxy, and I would like to remove them as well. And I have also update, which means existing variables in Foreman that their value in the smart proxy was changed, and I would like to change it in Foreman as well. So as you can see here, I have in this role, I have 4 variables I would like to add, 1 that I would like to remove, and in this role, I have 1 that I would like to update. So this is the first improvement. The second improvement is related to the fact that now I can import all of the roles that were installed from a collection. So let me show you how it's done. Basically, I have here an Ansible Galaxy and that I would like to install. So I would go to my smart proxy and perform the installation of the collection. And yeah, it was installed. And now if I will refresh my page, I will see all of the, let me share all of the roles. So now I can see all of the roles from the cost collection. I have in each role the prefix of the collection, and I can see exactly how many variables I need to add in each role. So that's it. I hope you find this improvement useful. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shira. That looks great. Has anyone any questions? Anyone who wants to come off mute, or anyone on Freenode? And if not, that concludes the user-focused demos for this session. And now we will move on to Foreman developer-focused demos. So our first demo will be from Jeremy again, and he's going to talk about React state management, where to put data. Thank you, Shira.
Thank you, Melanie. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So for my second demo, yes, React state management, or where to put my data. So as a React developer, you have so many options about where to put your data. There's local component state, Redux, MobX. I'm sure there's React context. I'm sure there's a couple libraries that I haven't even heard of yet. And specifically as a Foreman React developer, there's even more options that add some complexity. We've got those three that I mentioned. Also, we put stuff on the global window object. There's other React contexts. There's local storage, session storage. React router kind of does its own thing. So it can all be a little bit overwhelming. So what do you do? So we decided to add a document to our storybook to provide some guidance and opinions on what to do if you're a Foreman React developer. These opinions are pretty mainstream, but obviously we're always open to feedback. It's open source. It's what we're all about. So the document's there for you to read on our storybook. I'll link to it at the end of this presentation. But what I'd like to do is just briefly outline that guidance in the next few minutes here. So first we have local component state. And local state is good for data that's used only locally by the React component that you're working with, or data that affects the component's direct children and can be easily passed down as props. So for example, the value of a form input is really good for local state, or the state of a dropdown. This is actually a real world example from the Foreman code. We have a user dropdowns component. And what we're doing is tracking the state of whether the dropdown is dropped down or not. One thing I really like about using React native features is that there's React Dev Tools allows you to see everything. So this is a screenshot of this React Dev Tools Chrome extension. You can add it to your browser, and it adds a components tab. And you can see on the right side of the screen there the value of that state and the whole React tree in the middle there. And then on the left side of the screen, you can see what the actual component looks like that I'm talking about. It's just a drop down that says my account and log out. So advantage of this is it's very simple. The disadvantage is once you're outside that particular component, you no longer have access to the data. So what do you do when things get more complex? So that's when the Redux store comes in. Redux is good for data that needs to be shared across many components, especially ones that don't share a common ancestry in the React tree. Also, we have a pretty standardized way of storing our API responses in Foreman in Redux, which I think is pretty great. This is a screenshot of the Redux DevTools, which is another extension that you can add to Chrome if you want. And I think it's great. On the right side of the screen there, you can see what our Redux store actually looks like. You have a glimpse of the data there. And then on the left side, you can see all of the Redux actions that are happening in real time. I think this is a great way to troubleshoot. You can actually see what's going on, what actions happen in what order. And that's one of the reasons I think Redux is really good, not only for storing or seeing what's there right now, but like troubleshooting and seeing what happened, what the user did. If you set it up right, you can like replay every user interaction, and it's got some really powerful tools there. So I really recommend the Redux Dev Tools if you want to check that out. You can also see how an individual action changed the store, which is helpful. Obviously, disadvantage of using Redux is there's lots of code that you have to add. There's lots of boilerplate, and it adds lots of complexity. It can be kind of hard to hold in your head. But in return for that, you get something very powerful and reliable. So we do use it a lot in Foreman. And then thirdly, we have Foreman Context. Foreman Context is actually our implementation of React Context, and it's good for data that doesn't change but is needed all over. So in this example here, we actually store the pagination settings, the version of Foreman that you're using, the organization, location, and current user. You can get all of that from Foreman Context. And what's great about this is that it doesn't require any API requests at all. The data is already there. You can just use it. There's no boilerplate like Redux. The only disadvantage is that you can't really change any of this data. So it's more for read-only pieces of data. So we've got those three options: local state, Redux, and context. So if you're asking yourself the question, where do I put my data? One of these three is usually the answer. But I do want to mention some less used options and some quirks that are more specific to Foreman. So we've got a global window object that we store some stuff on. So as you know, Foreman is a very hybrid app. It's mostly Rails serving ERB, which turns into HTML, but we also sprinkle React components on the page where we need them. And for that, you can use this component registry. There's more info on how to do it in Storybook. But basically, you just register a React component on the registry here, and then you refer to it in the ERB markup. We also have ways for legacy JavaScript frameworks to interact with the Redux store. So as you might know, we have some pages in Katello that are written in Angular. We have jQuery in a few places still, I think, in Foreman. And those legacy JavaScript frameworks actually do have access to our Redux store through the store key here. So you can access that if needed. This TFM object also has several other items. I'm sure they each have a reason for existing, but if you were to ask me what like config reports modal diff is, I'm not sure I'd be able to tell you. Bottom line is that most of the time you're only going to need the store and component registry off of this, and don't worry about the rest unless you really need to. Sometimes there's always a good reason. And then lastly, we have session storage and local storage. Session storage is used to store some user preferences. The idea here is to store a volatile temporary state, things that won't impact the user if they get lost. We have some stuff related to layout and the notification drawer, etc. And then local storage, which is the browser's key value store, we actually don't use at all that I could find in Foreman. I would recommend using Redux instead. So there's our Foreman quirks, the TFM object component registry, and our ways for legacy JavaScript to access the Redux store. And then we have the three main ways to store data: component state, Redux, and context. So putting it all together, there's never one right answer. This is another real-world example from Katello. And in this one component, we're using Redux, context, and local state all in the same component. So you just have to think about what decision is best for each piece of data. So like I said before, the content of this presentation is available as a Storybook document. Our Storybook is hosted at foremanstorybook.surge.sh. I'll paste the link in the chat here in a moment as well. If you want more info about React hooks and how to use state with that, I highly recommend the React docs. They're really good. If you've never seen them, they're really straightforward. And if you're just learning, it's a great resource. And then you can always ping us on IRC on the Foreman Dev channel. We're always open to feedback. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Jeremy. Could you also, the link to that, would you mind pasting it in as a reply into the community demo on the discourse? I'll put it into the video also after this. But if there's any questions for Jeremy, now's a good time. And if not, we shall move on to Leos once again, who will talk about JWT scope for controller and actions, please.
Yes, let me share the screen and share. Okay, can you see the screen and the Foreman?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, as you said, I'm going to talk about JWT tokens and the scope. So as you may know, you can use JSON Web Tokens as an authentication method for the API. You don't have to use just username and password. There is also new way how to authenticate by personal access tokens, but I'm not going to talk about them today. So about the JSON Web Tokens, I'll show the example with the host registration, where when you generate the command, you can see that we use authorization header with the token, and this is the JSON Web Token, JWT. Problem with this solution was that the JSON Web Token includes some information about the current user, and in past didn't include any restrictions about the scope where you can use it. What does it mean is that previously, if you had this token right now generated by admin user, that gives you ultimate access to API where you can create hosts, delete everything, and do whatever you would as you are as the admin user. Well, easily you can change the password and do whatever you want. So what I added was scope for the JSON token. It's pretty simple. You just have array with the hashes where you define the scopes, you define controller name and the actions for the controller, and that's basically it. Then you can just generate the JWT token and use it where you want to. So as you can see here is the registration. So if I will call it from my console, but without the dash, you can see that it works okay. I downloaded the template as expected, but if I will try to call Foreman, but not register action, but let's say API v2 hosts, it will fail. I hope it will fail with unable to authenticate user, and in the log you can see the JWT SSO invalid scope for hosts controller. So as you can see, this JWT tokens is only scoped to actions related to registration, and you can't use it, for example, for creating new hosts or users or anything else, just for registering hosts. And that's everything about this feature.
Thank you very much, Leos. So if you have any questions for Leos, you can ask now. Okey-doke. Thank you, Jeremy, for posting that link. And our next demo is oprazak with a slot for host group parameters, please.
You should be able to see my screen now. And I have just a quick update about a new slot that I've added. Actually, it's two slots. One is for host groups and one is for hosts. And this slot is primarily meant to be extended with host parameters. So if your plugin has parameters that you would like to add into the host or host group form, then this slot is what you need. If I take a look at the actual slot, you can find it in between Puppet class parameters and global parameters on the page. If you're not sure how to use slot and fill, I recommend taking a look at our storybook. There is a whole document about how to use these, and that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ondrej. So any questions? Okey-doke. So we have three demos coming up from Amir.
Hello,
Next.
everyone. Sharing my screen, just a second. And by the way, the last demo is by Ondrej. So I'm demoing 2 features.
Oh,
so
okay.
Just a second. Let me share my screen.
Oh yeah, I see the slash now.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Thank you.
Cool. So thanks, Melanie. And so today I'm going to talk about 2 features. The first is about useAPI. The useAPI is a simplified way to fetch data from the server and store that data in our store, in our Redux store. And the second feature is about skeletonloader. So these 2 features are related to each other because when you fetch the data, you also want to have a loading component in order to show that the resource is loading at the moment. So without further ado, let's dive into the hooks. What are hooks? So just a few words about some backgrounds about hooks. So hooks is a new way to interact with React features in a functional component. So before that, we had hooks. We had 2 components. One was a functional component, and the other was a class component. But with the functional component, you couldn't do almost anything. You couldn't have access to React features. You didn't have any lifecycle events. So now with hooks, you can have some sort of React. You basically have all the React features, including a lifecycle event, and therefore you can control side effects. And custom hooks basically let us to extract some shareable logic into some custom hooks, so we can reuse this logic into other components. So for example, the useAPI is a custom hook. And let's have a look on that function signature. So as you can see, that function has 3 arguments. The first one is the method, which is get, post, and etc. And the second is the URL, for example, API hosts. And the third one is options. Basically, it's an object, and it reflects the same options that we have already in our API middleware, which means you can have your headers, parameters, callbacks like handle error and handle success. And also you can control toast notifications. So whether the API was success or ends with a failure, you can show a toast notification with your wanted data. So let's see how we can use and consume this hook. As you can see, the useAPI returns an object, and that object has 3 properties. The first one is a response, so it's the same response that we get from the server and also stored in our Redux store. The second is the status of that API call, and it can be resolved, pending, or error. And the third is a key. So if you don't pass a key, you can pass a key to the options object. But if you don't pass any key, the useAPI hook will generate a key for you. And why it's important? Because in our store, API call saves as key value pairs in our Redux store. So if you want to access to that to the corresponding data, you need the key. So you can access to that data in another component, in a sibling component, and etc. So that's why the key is important. And if you don't give your own key, the useAPI generates it for you. So let's talk about pros versus cons for this approach. So Jeremy discussed and mentioned Redux before, and of course Redux, has a lots of boilerplate. So in this approach, you don't need to understand how Redux works. You don't need to dispatch any action. You don't need to get the data from the store and use selectors for that, because as you can see, it's a really simple approach. You just need to use and consume the useAPI, and you get the response from it. And also it improves the readability of the code. So we don't have any boilerplate here. You don't need to understand how Redux works. And also it's available in plugins, so you can consume this in plugins. There is a major disadvantage in this approach, which is, it's shareable among all of the hooks, React hooks, which is any hook must be in the top level, which means you shouldn't put your hook or this hook under conditions, callbacks, or loops. And a little background, React behind the scenes memorizes your hooks or the component hooks. So the order of these hooks are really important. So if, for example, you put this useAPI hook under a condition, it means that the condition sometimes can return negative, can return a false. That hook basically won't be in that list. So the order is breaking, and therefore the component wouldn't be constant. So that's why you can't put any hook under conditions, callbacks, or loop. But in some cases, we still want to have API in our callback. For example, in a component that, for example, fetch the data, but we have a button that also refresh the data. So we can, there is a workaround that we can achieve both. So of course, we can use the useAPI for fetching the data in the first loading. And we also can have a callback, on-click callback in a button, for example. And in that callback, we can just have our API middleware action that fetch the data. You don't need to create a use selector for getting the data if you use the same key. And that's why the key is really important, because if you use that key and in another API call, the results, the response will be changed in the next rendering. So it will be up to date to the corresponding store. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that hook. You can find, of course, the documentation in our storybook. You can also run storybook, and it's the latest version in your console under Foreman directory. Just type npm run stories, and that will create a storybook environment, and that environment will be the latest environment. Okay, so let's move to the next feature, which is the skeleton loader, and also it a little bit connected to the API hook, because while the data is fetching, we want to render a loading stage. So we already have a loader in Foreman. For example, we have a loader for that adds a spinner. But this component, this feature adds a skeleton loader. So let's see how it looks. So as you can see in the right side, this is how the skeleton loader looks like. And in the left side, this is the implementation, how you can consume this loader. So basically, it's really simple. You just import the skeleton loader, and the children is basically the data you want to load. Let's discuss about the props. So the first prop is the status. It's the same status from the API, which means pending error resolved. So you just pass the same status you got from the useAPI hook. The second one is skeleton props, which basically is an object for all of the props you want to pass to the skeleton component. we use React loading skeleton, which is the most popular skeleton component, control that component with the given skeleton props. For example, there is a count prop, which basically counts, you can control the amount of bars. For example, in this example, we have 2 bars. The third is empty state, which can be a string or a component. And if the status returned as resolved, but the data is undefined, we want to render an empty state. So by default, it would return not available string, but you can control it and you can add your own empty state. It can be a string and it can be a component. And last but not least is the error node, which basically it's by its name, if the status returned an error, this skeleton loader will return an error node. So you can give your own, and if you don't give anything, you just get the empty state as a default. So that's all I have to share, and thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Amir. So has anyone any questions? And if not, we will go to our final demo of the day, which is from Ondrej, which is another reacting plugin template demo. I'll leave you explain it, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Moni. So just to reiterate for those who don't know what's Foreman plugin template, Foreman plugin templates let you create your own plugin and gives you the skeleton of the plugin, basically with a few simple examples. And you can find it through writing your own plugin on the plugins documentation page. And you would go through the how to create a Foreman plugin that brings you to the developer documentation. And here you can go to the using the example plugin, and here you can see how to use it. And now to the changes that were added to the Foreman plugin template. I will just go through them briefly, but we will share a more complex deep dive a bit later on, because the changes are quite heavy. So the first change I want to mention is that now we are having everything scoped. So you have to use your plugin scope and not the global scope for all your models, controllers, and helpers. That's the first change, and that's introduced by the isolated namespace. This line here. So you will have the plugin in completely separate namespace. It brings some other changes that we will share in the deep dive on how to use the plugin template with the new changes. But just heads up. And then all the changes that are necessary for using React in your plugin. And one huge change is that now you can use React router in the plugin. So for those of you who wants to play with it, go ahead and take a look at the PR, the last PR in the Foreman plugin template that has been merged, and you can either play on your own current plugins and add Foreman React router, or create a new plugin, play around with it there. But as I said, we will have a more complex deep dive later on. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Ondrej. I'll just check if there are any questions? And so far there aren't. So while I'll just give a minute for people who are still watching on the stream, there are a few to perhaps catch up. And in the meantime, I would just like to, I'll just present my screen for a moment. And just talk briefly about, can you see my screen? Anyone, can you confirm?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So earlier on, Justin talked about, as part of the work for Katello 4.0, that the documentation is moving to a new site. So that site is docs.theforeman.org, and the repo for that is here. So just a small introduction basically is that over the last number of years, we've been open sourcing the satellite enterprise documentation and making them available to the Foreman community. ATIX have also come on board, and they're going to open source some guides that we don't have and make them available at this repo here. A lot of that work is in progress now. We are at the point where we're branching, and hopefully we're going to get to the point where Foreman and Katello docs are hosted at docs.theforeman. So they will be hosted here long term. We're a little bit off, but we're getting there. So in the meantime, the old Foreman manual, I made a post earlier this week where I have just basically outlined that we want to make improvements essentially. So we're not going to just migrate the old Foreman manual to this new location. We're going to go topic by topic and just see what exists already in the open sourced Red Hat satellite docs that will become the new Foreman official docs, and ensuring that we have all of the information in one place, and then start to deprecate parts of the Foreman manual. If you're documenting a new feature in any time in the future, it would be great if you would consider raising a PR here at the Foreman/Foreman documentation repo. I or somebody else who has been involved in maintaining this will be happily review it. And there's also kind of a comprehensive README here. There are templates, and we're just going to try and make the docs a little bit better for the Foreman community in general. Just try to control it a little bit more, apply standards, versions, updates, and just try and have a better experience for everyone. If you would, for example, be interested in looking at contributing something at the moment, feel free to look at this chart, and all PRs are welcome. I will be working through it in the next few weeks. If you've any questions, just reach out to me, and I will happily happily answer. And I think that is everything from me, and I will just check one last time to see if there are questions. And there aren't, so okie doke. I'd like to thank everybody who came and demoed today across all different time zones. I'd like to thank everybody who stayed with us with the network issues during the live stream. If you have any questions at any point, if you're watching back, or if you think of something later, just feel free to reach out to us on Freenode IRC or on the Foreman Community Discourse, or drop a comment into the video comments, and I check every now and again, so I'll ensure that we get some response out to you. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Take care.